So good afternoon, everybody. You're all very welcome indeed. Just to let you know, we are recording this session. We will be making it available for others. There's a very large audience for this presentation today. No surprise. If anybody knows Dr. William Roulston, you know the quality of his work and his presenting. And so we are recording for those who have signed up for the event but are unable to join us, maybe work or recurring responsibilities. So we are recording it today. If you haven't already, you might like to put into the chat where you're joining us from. Okay. I suppose I should have started by introducing myself. I'm Fintan Mullen. I'm the director of the Ulster Historical Foundation. I'm joined with our speaker today, Dr. William Roulston, our research director. William, if you give everybody a wave or a nod.
Hi, everybody.
And also helping out on the chat end of things, and the host for the presentation is our research officer, Gillian Hunt. Give us a wave there, Gillian. Okay, so you're all here to listen to William, not to me. So all I will want to do is to introduce William. He is the research director of the foundation, has been since 2006. He joined the foundation in about 1997, working as a researcher, and he completed his PhD in the field of archaeology in 2004. As many of you know, William has written quite a number of really excellent books. I suppose the best known is his research in Scots-Irish ancestors. He also has written research on farming ancestors and researching Presbyterian ancestors in Ireland. But we're focusing on the farming subject today. So William, in this presentation, will be looking at records relating to farming ancestors in Ireland. So William, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Fintan, and good afternoon to you from me. I'm in the County Antrim countryside, where we are experiencing a heat wave here. It's high 20s and it's lovely weather, but thank you very much to all of you joining from wherever you are. I know we've people here from across the globe, so you're very welcome. So in this presentation, I'm going to be looking at the subject of researching farming ancestors in Ireland. It's a subject that I hope will appeal to many of you. So many people in Ireland do not have to go back very many generations before they find a farmer in the family, or someone who simply lived off the land in one way or another, were engaged in an agricultural related occupation. So I'm going to be looking at a range of different records that can help you find out more about your farming ancestors on this island. So what subjects will be covered in this presentation? Well, first of all, I'm going to be looking at landed estate papers. Then I'm going to move on to the Registry of Deeds, then valuation records, looking briefly then at land purchase records, and also then looking at other sources. So because we only have about an hour, I'm not going to be going into too much detail in any one of these, but I'm going to be giving you a flavour of what is out there, and hopefully will spur you on to seeing what you can find yourself. I'll be looking at records that are available in the archives in Ireland, but I'll also be showing you how you can access some of these records online. So let's begin then with landed estate papers. And why are landed estate papers important? Well, first of all, what we're talking about here are the records relating to the management of the great landed estates in Ireland. We must remember that very few farmers in Ireland own their farms outright. Rather, they lease them from a landlord or perhaps an intermediary known as a middleman. But farmers didn't own their farms outright. Now, various processes contributed to the creation of the landed estate system in Ireland. The plantation of Ulster, even the predecessors of that, even the settlements of the Anglo-Normans and the 16th century attempts at plantation, but also then the Cromwellian, the Restoration land settlements of the 1650s onwards. All of these contributed to the creation of a landed estate system in Ireland, where you could say that land was owned by a small minority of people, a landed elite, and the overwhelming majority of farmers, in fact, almost 100% of farmers were tenants on an estate. And it wasn't until the passing of a series of acts of parliament in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that these landed estates were broken up and an owner-occupier class of farmers was created. And I'll be talking briefly about the records relating to the breakup of the landed estates in due course. Now, of course, the landed estates varied considerably in size. The largest landed estates were tens of thousands of acres, maybe upwards of 100,000 acres. Some of the smaller estates were maybe a couple of thousand acres. So there was considerable variation among the landed class in Ireland. Farmers themselves, their farms ranged in size from maybe just a handful of acres, eking out a living on just a small plot of ground, to those who maybe had more sizable farms, maybe even upwards of 100 acres themselves. Now, where can you find landed estate papers? Where can you find the records relating to the management of landed estates in Ireland? Well, for Northern Ireland, in fact, not just for the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, but for the entire 9 counties of Ulster, the main repository is the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland in Belfast. I'll go through some of these in more detail presently, but just to name them, the Public Record Office in Belfast is the main place to research tenant farming families in the province of Ulster. You also have some very, very good collections of estate papers in the National Library of Ireland. It would be the principal place in the Republic of Ireland for landed estate papers. You'll also find some in the National Archives of Ireland, and you'll find landed estate papers in many of the county archives, county museums, county libraries across Ireland. So for instance, in Northern Ireland, you might have Armagh County Museum, has some very good collections of estate papers. But in the Republic of Ireland, well, I know that Donegal County Archives has some very good material, and some of the other archives have some excellent collections of estate papers as well. For those other archives, well, many of them do have a well-established online presence now. But you can also find information through the Irish Archives resource. I'll mention that in a moment as well. Okay, so the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. In many ways, you could say it's a state archive of Northern Ireland. But one of the great strengths of the Public Record Office of PRONI is its vast collection of what could be described as privately deposited records. So private records include church records. They include records of individual families who've deposited personal papers in PRONI, and they include the records of the great landed estate. So PRONI was established just after partition in the early 1920s, and right from the start, conscious of the loss of so many records and the destruction of the old Public Record Office in 1922, conscious of that, the early archivists in PRONI made a concerted effort to go out and look for landed estate papers. In fact, some of the very earliest records in PRONI are landed estate papers. So PRONI has a well-established web presence as well, and it's once voluminous paper catalogues. Anybody who can remember the old PRONI in Balmoral Avenue will remember the shelves of paper catalogues running around 4 walls of the search room. Well, those catalogues have been now digitised and can be searched through the PRONI e-catalogue. And among the great collections of privately deposited records, as I've said, are landed estate papers. So for many of these large estates, you can read detailed introductions to the records. You can download them through the PRONI website. So if you go to the section of the PRONI website for significant privately deposited archives, introductions to significant privately deposited archives, you can download as PDFs. In some cases, very detailed introductions to the records. These files will give you an idea of the history of the estate, the history of the family that owned the estate, and something of the scope of the records themselves. So the Abercorn estate, very important in my own family history. My family were tenants on the Abercorn estate for generations. But the Abercorn collection is one of the largest in PRONI. And you can see on the screen where it references around 29,300 individually numbered documents. Okay, over 29,000 individually numbered documents. 759 volumes, 88 bundles, and 40 PRONI boxes covering the period 1219 to 1963. In fact, the oldest document in PRONI is in the Abercorn papers. It's a papal bull. It is from the early 13th century, but it concerns the family's Scottish property, not actually their Irish estate. But it just shows you the extent of some of these major collections of estate papers in Prony. Now, as I mentioned already, the National Library of Ireland has got a superb collection of estate papers. And it's worth making the point, actually, that the records in Prony may be primarily about the province of Ulster, but there are still collections of estate papers in Prony for other parts of Ireland as well. That may be simply because the landed family not only owned an estate in Ulster, but they had property elsewhere in Ireland. For example, the Marquis of Downshire, who owned tens of thousands of acres in County Down. He was seated at Hillsborough. He also had an estate at Edenderry in County Offaly. And there's a very good collection of records for that particular estate in Prony also. And likewise, the National Library of Ireland is not records exclusively for what's now the Republic of Ireland. It is records of interest to those researching ancestors in Northern Ireland as well. Some really good collections of records, such as, for instance, I can think of a lovely volume of maps of the Bryce estate in County Antrim and County Down from the 1750s. That's available in the National Library of Ireland. Lovely volume of maps for the Beresford estate in County Londonderry. Again, it's available in the National Library of Ireland. So don't think that an archive will only have records relating to a particular jurisdiction, present-day jurisdiction. You may find records from across Ireland. Now, in the National Library, you can also download some lovely detailed introductions to the estates and detailed catalogues of the estates. So just thinking of the Farnham estate in County Cavan, the largest estate in County Antrim, quite a scattered estate. Some estates were very compact. The Farnham included quite a few different properties in County Cavan, but there's a detailed listing of that catalogue can be downloaded from the NLI website. So just to show you Farnham papers, rent rolls, even going back to 1699, records going back into the 17th century. And so anybody, say, looking for a Cavan ancestor who may have been a tenant on the Farnham estate, you may find some lovely material of relevance in the Farnham papers in the National Library of Ireland. The Sources Catalogue is another very useful database, online database, hosted by the National Library of Ireland. It's based on records that were, you might say, collated back as far as the 1950s, maybe even earlier. So, word of warning, some of it may be slightly out of date, but still, it's well worth checking just to see what might be available. And if the things have changed, if, for example, in a few cases, documents have been relocated or maybe been given a new reference, you can at least pursue that further. But it's a very useful guide to landed estate papers as well, or at least sources in a wide variety of different archives. It's not limited to what's in the National Library. You'll find references to documents in Prony and National Archives and some other institutions as well, or many other institutions as well. Now, I mentioned the Irish Archive resource. This is a very good guide to what's out there in, you might say, some of the regional archives in Ireland as well, the county archives, the county libraries and county museums. And again, it does include information on the location of landed estate papers, so it can be used for that purpose. It's well worth checking out. And if you're looking for an ancestor who lived on a landed estate in the provinces of Connacht, Munster, and the counties of Cavan, Donegal, and Monaghan and Ulster, I would direct you to the Landed Estates website. It's an initiative of the University of Galway. It's a really excellent resource. It's freely available and is a superb guide to the location of landed estates, the families, the big houses in which they lived, but also the location of the records themselves. So just to take an example of the Temple, or the Temple Cowper estate, which was mainly in County Sligo, You get a basic summary of the estate, but also you get information on where the records relating to the estate are held. And you'll see on the right-hand side of the slide, a lot of the records are available in Sligo County Library. There's some other records in Prony. There are even some records in Southampton University Library as well as some in the National Library of Ireland. So this is an essential resource for anyone researching an ancestor who lived on a landed estate in Connacht, Munster, and the Ulster counties of Donegal, Cavan, and Monaghan. Now, you can also find a very useful guide to landed estate papers in John Grenham's excellent volume, Tracing Your Irish Ancestors. The fifth edition was published in 2019. And for every county in Ireland, John goes through the landed estates and lists in very summary fashion what's available. So for County Cavan, for instance, the excerpt relates to that county. You can have information on the Annesley estate in County Cavan. He'll give an indication of the records available, whether they're maps or rentals. He'll give an indication of where they can be found. And he also, very usefully, will give an indication of the civil parishes in which the estate records concern. So again, I would encourage you to have a look at John's book and also his website as well. Much of the information is available on his website also, so definitely worth checking out. And my own volume, Researching Scots-Irish Ancestors. In this, I do try to identify as many landed estate collections as possible for the 9 counties of Ulster. So I think I've identified over 300 different collections of landed estate papers, mainly in Prony, but others in the likes of the National Library, some across the water in England and Scotland also. Some of the regional archives there also have records of relevance. In some cases, there might be a single item. In other cases, there may be a significant collection of documents. So if you're interested in an Ulster ancestor and you're interested in the period before 1800, my own volume may be of help to you if you're looking for an ancestor in the 9 counties of Ulster. Now, you may be wondering, well, how do you know which estate to look at? Well, I would direct you to Andrew Kane's fabulous book, Townland Atlas of Ulster, published in late 2024, sold out very quickly and was reprinted just a few weeks ago. And in this book, Andrew lists all 16,000 townlands in the province of Ulster. And he indicates the civil parish, the Catholic parish, the Church of Ireland parish in which the townland is found. He indicates the poor law union, the barony, the extent of the townland, how many acres it contains. And one of the most wonderful elements of the book is a section where there are maps arranged on a barony basis showing the location of landed estates across Ulster. So anybody, again, looking for an Ulster ancestor, this is an absolutely essential resource. Sadly, there is not the equivalent yet for the rest of Ireland, but certainly if you're looking for an Ulster ancestor, this is a book that you will find very useful. So just to show you, for instance, a slide showing the estates in the barony of Strabane in County Tyrone. This is the northwest corner of County Tyrone. You'll know county is the largest county in Northern Ireland. And you'll see where it's colour coded to indicate the different estates. So the very top of the map in the blue, that's the manor of Dunalong, which was granted to the first Earl of Abercorn in 1610. Immediately to its south in the purple is the manor of Clohogle, which was granted to the first Earl's brother, Sir George Hamilton. And then in the lighter blue beside that is the manor of Elliston, or rather Manor Elliston, which was granted to another Hamilton brother as part of the plantation scheme. So for every barony in Ulster, Andrew has prepared a map like this showing who owned each townland in the entire province of Ulster. So let's start with some records that can be useful in looking for looking for ancestors who were farmers. Well, first of all, leases. Leases are wonderful documents. A lease is essentially a contract between the landlord and the tenant, the lessor and the lessee. So a lease may contain or it will contain rather, the location of the farm, usually given by townland, but sometimes it can be very specific as to where exactly in the townland that farm was located. So it might say bounded on the north by so-and-so's farm, on the south by so-and-so's farm, on the west by a bog, on the east by a river. So you can get some very detailed information that allows you to pinpoint the location of the farm. Sometimes you might even get a map attached to a lease, which will show you exactly where the farm was located. It'll include the rent to be paid. And the rent was typically paid twice a year on what were known as gale days, Gale, maybe the 1st of March and the 1st of September. You'll also get the conditions fulfilled by the lessee. Now, those conditions could be such things as a requirement to divide the farm up into fields and to plant hedges to distinguish between those fields. It could be a requirement to build a house of certain dimensions, of certain roof covering. It could be a requirement to plant an orchard. Usually you'll find a requirement for the corn grown on the farm or the oats grown on the farm to be taken to the landlord's mill. That was a carefully guarded right by landlords. Tenants didn't have free rein to take their corn to where they could get the best price. Rather, they had to take it to where they could get to where the landlord told them to take it. Now, you'll also find in the lease the tenure. Okay, so the tenure is the period the lease is valid for. And there were typically two types of tenure. One was a lease for years. So in other words, a lease that would not expire until a certain number of years had passed. So very often farmers were issued with leases for 21 or 31 years. Now, you can find shorter leases, you can find much longer leases, but typically farmers received leases for 21 or 31 years. It's worth making the point that for much of the 18th century, Catholic tenant farmers could not lease land for more than 31 years. That was part of the penal laws in force in Ireland at that time. The other type of lease you can find is a lease for lives. Now, a lease for lives is a lease that would not expire until certain individuals identified by name in that lease had died. So as long as those persons were still alive, the lease was valid. Now, usually a lease for lives also included a concurrent term of years. So it could be, for example, for a life or for 21 years, whichever was the longer. Now, the number of lives included in such a lease varied. You could have just one life, or you could have 4 or even 5. I've seen leases where you have even 5 people named as lives. But 3 was fairly typical. So a 3 lives lease was granted to many tenant farmers in the 18th century and early 19th century. Again, to make the point, a Catholic tenant farmer could not receive a lease for lives for much of the 18th century. But when that changed, from the very end of the 18th century, you do see Catholic farmers receiving leases for lives. Now, who were these lives? Well, the fact is that in many instances, you'll find the lives being like members of the royal family, the likes of the Prince of Wales, the Duke of York, Princess Caroline, whoever. But very often you'll find the farmer and members of his immediate family named as lives. And if you can find a lease like that, you can sometimes get information that you'll really struggle to find elsewhere. So, and not only do you have the names of the family members, you'll have those relationships indicated, and you'll have the ages of the persons named as lives as well, particularly if they were children. Women could be named as lives. Women and girls could be named as a life in a lease. It certainly was not exclusively for men, men and boys. But, let's say a farmer, John Smith, and his 2 sons, James Smith and William Smith. James aged 6, William aged 4. They were the lives. As long as at least one of them was still alive, that lease was valid. Now, a study of the Downshire estate in County Down revealed that a lease for lives could often last upwards of 50 or even 60 years, depending on the lifespan of at least one of the people named as a life in the lease. So from a farmer's point of view, a lease for lives was a very treasured possession. Now, of course, what happens when a particular individual named as a life died? Well, of course, landlords were very keen to keep on top of this information. If the person was still alive, then the lease was valid, but if they died, the lease had expired, and then the landlord could issue a new lease with higher rent, new terms and conditions. So here's a letter from the Montgomery estate in County Down. It dates from 1789, and the writer writes to Montgomery and says, "The present is to inform you that old John Lendrum, who was the life of the lands of, I think that's Shananelly and Mullaghmore, died this day, and that the lands now come into your own hands." Okay, so in this case, the person named as a life had passed away, and now the landlord had an opportunity to change the terms and conditions, to issue a new lease to the tenants. So again, within estate collections, you can find some lovely correspondence, examples like this, but also examples that really give us an insight into the lives of the farmers, what life was like for the farmers of the day. And this is an interesting example of, you might call it a lease book. Essentially, it's a record of the tenants on the Aldborough estate in County Wicklow. Now, again, to make the point, this document is in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. It concerns an estate in County Wicklow. So just indicates again that records from some estates, various places, can end up in an archive, such as Proney, National Library, or wherever. But in this case, it's a very detailed document. It gives the date of the lease. It gives the names of the tenants. It gives the denomination of land. You'll notice as well, it has a column titled freeholder or papist. Papist, of course, being a derogatory name for Catholics of the day. You'll get the duty. So in some cases, farmers didn't just pay a cash rent, but they also paid a certain proportion of their rent in kind, such as paying and handing over to the landlord a certain number of items of poultry or sheep or pigs, or providing a certain number of days of free labor for the landlord. And then you get comments as well in the observations column. So, so much rich information is contained in this particular document, and just highlights the depth of the information that you can find. Now, you also find maps within estate collection. Some of these maps are absolutely beautiful. For instance, you've got a lovely set of maps of the Gosford estate in County Cavan. So this is the estate. This is what was known as the Arva estate, belonging to the Earl of Gosford rather, and it dates from around about 1800. And in this case, what's so useful about the maps is that they record the names of the tenants on the individual farms. Now, some cases you simply get a map and it might have no more than the boundaries of the farms, may not indicate the tenants' names. But in this case, this volume of maps has the name of the tenant of each of the farms, as well as giving the acreage and the rent as well. So this is an example of a lovely set of maps, and you can find many of these in Proney and the National Library and the National Archives, and in many other of the institutions in Ireland. Now, you'll find all sorts of, you might say, unusual items within estate collections. So this is one from the Shirley estate in County Monaghan. This was a very large estate in South County Monaghan. And this is a list of people who applied to be sent to Australia in 1849. This is the period of the Great Famine. These are people who have decided that their future no longer lay in Ireland, and who were given assistance to help them to move to Australia. And you can find a very interesting set of records relating to emigration within the Shirley estate papers and within other estate collections as well, as landlords were prepared to assist tenants to emigrate to another part of the world. But in this case, you can see it's headed Immigration List for Australia, and it's from May 1849. So we get the townland, we get the name of the person, we get the observations, which may indicate, you can see the first one, Thomas Callan's daughter, for instance, so the family relationships can be found in documents like this. Okay, so moving on from land estate collections to the Registry of Deeds. Now, I've been to the Registry of Deeds many times. It's an absolutely amazing place to carry out research. The building, well, the formal address is Henrietta Street in Dublin, although it looks out over Constitution Hill. The building itself was built in the early 19th century, but the Registry of Deeds itself was opened in 1708. And the Registry of Deeds includes hundreds of thousands of copies of documents relating to the transfer of title to land. So you can find, for example, sales and conveyances, you can find leases, you can find mortgages, you can even find wills, you can find family settlements. What intensive research in it has taught me is that it's certainly not an archive purely of interest to those researching the landed elite or even the wealthier class of people. You can find a huge amount of detail in the Registry of Deeds relating to the ordinary tenant farmers of Ireland. So it's a really wonderful place to do research. You can still visit it if you want, but thanks to Family Search, you can now get access to the copies of the documents online. Now it's quite another talk in itself to go through how you actually do that. But in essence, when you're at the Registry of Deeds, you can look at the large transcript volumes. They contain copies of the documents that were submitted to the Registry of Deeds. So an original document was made, let's say the original document was made in County Donegal, an original transaction, a copy of it was made. That copy was taken to the Registry of Deeds, and then it was copied into a transcript volume. And so when you're at the Registry of Deeds, you can get access to the transcript volumes and the indexes to the deeds. But now through Family Search, you can get access to those transcript volumes and index volumes online. It takes a bit of perseverance, but it's certainly well worth spending some time doing it. And just relatively recently, from the start of this year, with the new, I suppose, experimental labs part of the website, you can now do a search of the memorials in the Registry of Deeds. And, through AI or however it's done, the handwriting itself can be read and you can pick up a lot of very useful information. So it's certainly worth checking out those resources through Family Search. There's also a wonderful indexing project, the Registry of Deeds Index Project. So certainly check that out as well. You can interrogate this database in various ways, but it contains upwards of 600,000 index entries. In fact, I see that's from September 2024. It's over 600,000. I would think it's considerably in excess of that in August 2025. And just to show you why the Registry of Deeds was so important for my own family history research, this is a copy of the document that was carried to Dublin in 1830. And it concerns when my great-great-great-grandfather, Robert Roulston, came into possession of the farm that we still have in the townland of Gordavay in Brady in County Tyrone. So this document told me two things. First of all, when did my great-great-grandfather move to Gordavay? It was in 1830. And also told me where he lived before he moved to Gordavay. Okay, so that allowed me to then pursue another avenue of research because it told me that he was from the townland of Ganahan or Ganvahan near Castlederg, about 20 miles away. And that is where he had been farming before. So one can only speculate why he moved in 1830. He was in his late 40s at this stage. He did have a young family, so maybe he thought there'd be opportunities for them. But it just shows you the potential of the Registry of Deeds to throw up so much invaluable information that helps us understand more about the lives of our ancestors. Okay, moving on to valuation records. So, the valuation of Ireland, the legislation that brought it into being was passed in 1826. And in 1830, fieldwork began in the very north of the north of Ireland. And fieldwork continued by moving south. Now, the intention of the valuation of Ireland was to introduce a more uniform and fairer way of assessing local taxation, essentially local taxation in Ireland. So it was an effort to introduce a systematic recording of the value of initially property of farms in Ireland. Now, a very useful book, if you want to purchase it to understand more about the records of the valuation of Ireland, is by Francis McGee. It's simply The Archives of the Valuation of Ireland, 1830 to 1865, and it's in the Maynooth Research Guides for Irish Local History series. So it goes into tremendous detail about the different records, about why the valuation changed over time, and the implications of that, and also how useful these records are for local and family history. So I mentioned the fact that the initial fieldwork was started in the very north of the north of Ireland and then moved south. For the parish of Donaghadee, these are the first valuation field books. Sometimes it's called the townland valuation because initially it was more concerned about the townlands rather than individual farms. Now, although more concerned about land use and value, it did record the names of those who lived in houses that met a certain threshold in terms of valuation. Initially, that was set at £3. It was later raised to £5. Although by the time it was raised to £5, much of the province of Ulster had been recorded. So certainly, the first valuation field books are very useful when it comes to people who lived in towns, but also farmers. Many farmers would have been living in a house that met that property threshold. And even if they didn't live in a house that was worth £3, the valuators were out in the field and they were recording details of houses. And they maybe thought, well, that house looks like it's worth £3. But maybe when they got back, they studied a bit more carefully their notes and they said, well, it's not really worth £3. But even by that stage, they had recorded the details about it. And what's so good about these records is that it gives you the dimensions of the house, and also there's a code to indicate what sort of condition it's in. So Robert Roulston, my 3 times great-grandfather, his house is listed there. It was 66.5 feet long. It was 23.5 feet wide. It was 8 feet high to the eave. So obviously it was a single-story house. It's given the code 2C+. And 2C+ means it was an old house, but it was in repair. It was thatched. It was built with a permanent material, either stone, brick, or lime mortar. Well, it was almost certainly built with stone and maybe held together with lime mortar. So it wasn't, for example, wood. It was a stone house. And it gives you the dimensions of any of the offices or outbuildings of the farm. As well. So this is really good. If you can find a farming ancestor in this, you can actually get an indication of the size of the house in which they lived in and something of the condition of that house. That particular valuation was carried out in 1833. So the first valuation field books for Northern Ireland are in Prony. The first valuation field books for counties in the Republic of Ireland are in the National Archives in Dublin. But you can get access to them through the National Archives website. If you go to the genealogy section of the website, you can get access to many of the valuation field books. And must be said, actually, some of the valuation field books on the National Archives website do concern Ulster as well. But the main set relate to counties in the Republic of Ireland. Okay, now the much better known valuation, or the best known of the valuation records of the 19th century, is Griffith's valuation. dating from the late 1840s through to the early 1860s. It's a printed source. It's all neatly tabulated and laid out. It's very easily databaseable. But you get details, for instance, of the occupiers of every property in Ireland, or virtually every property in Ireland, from the grandest mansion to the humblest cottage. So you get the name of the individual. You get the name of the immediate lessor. That's very often the landlord. You get a description of the tenement. That's provided in very succinct format. Simply a house, offices. Again, offices being farm outbuildings, and land, or maybe a house and a garden or a small garden. Or maybe it was a mill, for instance. You'll get the acreage of the property. You get the value of the land, the value of the buildings, and then the total valuation. So this is one of the essential genealogical sources. The loss of 19th century census records means a source like Griffiths assumes an importance that it was always going to be important, but maybe it wasn't going to quite be so important if, for example, the 1851 and 1861 census returns had survived. Now, of course, Griffiths' valuation was based on an actual valuation out in the field. You know, to gather the information that was recorded in the printed valuation, you had the evaluators out in the field recording details of every property. And this tenement valuation survives. Again, the field books for Northern Ireland are in Prony. The field books for the Republic of Ireland are in the National Archives in Dublin. And it should be said that the valuation of Ireland changed quite a bit over the course of, say, the first 30 years. So I've mentioned already, the valuation started in the far north of the north of Ireland and moved south. And as it moved south, things changed. And as it reached the south, then it began to move back up Ireland with these various changes in the nature of the valuation and what was recorded and how it was recorded. What it means is that for northern counties, there are almost two distinct sets of valuation records. The first are townland valuation records of the 1830s, and then the tenement valuations, Griffiths valuation of the 1850s and early 1860s. There's almost a generation of difference between the commencement of the first valuation in Ulster and then the conclusion of the tenement valuation and the printing of Griffiths valuation, again, in the north of Ireland. So just to show you why these records are important. Well, first of all, the important thing to emphasize is that more information is recorded in the field books than made it into the printed valuation. The printed valuation was fairly rigid in what was recorded, but in the valuation field books, you'll find little notes, little annotations to give you extra information. So there's a property. It's in the townland of Ballinamallett in the parish of Donaghadee. It's the property of a Thomas McFarland, and there's a little note to say new house and in a good business situation. Licensed house, and then goes on, and a grocery retail business. Licensed houses and the grocery retail business. So that's the sort of information you won't find in the printed valuation. But here you have it in the tenement valuation. And you can also find instances where names recorded in the valuation field books do not make it into the printed valuation. Even in the short time span between the information was initially gathered by the valuators and Griffiths was printed, there may be changes in occupancy. So here's a farm or a property in the townland of Achillean in the parish of Kappa in County Tyrone. And it was initially recorded as being in joint possession of Joseph Kyle and William Rutledge. But you'll notice that William Rutledge's name is crossed out. Property details are crossed out. And there's a little note written over here, but then I've blown it up big to indicate that the valuator writes this: I understand Rutledge disposed of his interest in this small farm a few days ago for £115. Joseph Kyle purchased. So there you are, and that's from 1858, 27th of August, 1858. So there's almost like real-time history recorded. So when you look at the printed version of Griffiths, they'll only find Joseph Kyle's name there. Now, of course, you can get access to Griffiths Valuation now through the Ask About Ireland website. I'm sure you're very familiar with that site. It allows you to search for a name, and it has, of course, the valuation maps that allow you to pinpoint the location of every property. And just to show you again, to make the point about the usefulness of Griffiths Valuation and the valuation field books. Sometimes if you have people with the same name in townlands, little descriptors would be added to help distinguish between them. So it could be such things as hair colouring, black, red. It could be the name of the father, which is very useful from a genealogical point of view, or it could be something of a physical characteristic. So this is the townland of Carrickkeane in County Tyrone. And in this townland, there are two Neil O'Neills, and they're distinguished as Neil O'Neill Short and Neil O'Neill Long. And then you have two Patrick O'Neills, Patrick O'Neill Little and Patrick O'Neill Big. So there's a physical characteristic used to distinguish between these four individuals, rather, Short, Long, Little, and Big. So look out for things like this, because again, especially if it names, say, the father of the occupier, that can be hugely important from a genealogical perspective. Okay, now Griffiths Valuation was a printed source, but the valuation continued, and so the valuation revision books, in Prony they're called the valuation revision books. The equivalent books in the Republic of Ireland are called the cancelled books, and they are in the valuation office in Dublin. But the Prony books are available online, so you can search the Prony website. You can search this database by townland. You can't search it by personal name, but you can search it by townland, and you simply work your way through the books that are relevant to that townland. You click the link and it'll bring it up on the screen, and you simply work your way through those particular records. So there's the cover of the book for the electoral division of Dunalong, and you can see where you can say go to the index image. So many of these books have an index page which lists the townlands, list the page number in which that townland is found. You can skip forward one page at a time, or you can skip forward 10 images in a go until you find the page you're interested in. So here's one just to show you. This is for the townland of Gordavay. This is where my ancestors lived, and at the very end of the 19th century, Charles Roulston, my great-grandfather, took over from his father, Thomas. But a little note has been added to the column over here. Now, you'll notice that if there is a change in occupancy, the name is crossed out, maybe a new name is written in, or here's it just says vacant, and the date or the year that change was noted, not necessarily the year in which the change took place, but the year in which the change was noted is recorded over here. And there's a little note here that just says, this is concerning the Roulston farm. It says, division asked for with son Charles, one receipt, and Charles has gone to Australia. Okay, there's a note that my great-grandfather had gone to Australia at the very end of the 19th century. But he obviously came back because he took over the farm. But again, just show you the sort of thing you can find. I'm not going to say you're going to find this every time you do a search, but just what you can find. Now, you'll also notice immediate lessor. LAP stamped. Now, LAP stands for Land Act Purchase. This is just when properties in this particular area were being bought out from the landlord, from the Duke of Abercorn. Before going on to look in more detail at that, just to mention that you can now get access to the Northern Ireland Valuation Revision books through Ancestry, and you can use this to search by personal name. Now, what I would suggest is not only using the Ancestry website, but use this in conjunction with the Prony website to try and maximize the information that you can find from the valuation revision books. So you use both, work back and forth between both to make the most of this particular resource. Okay, so I mentioned about land purchase records and land purchase of the late 19th century. So essentially, from the late 19th century onwards, a series of acts of parliament were passed that allowed the tenant farmers to buy out their farms. Now, the different acts included different terms and conditions, but essentially, the farmer bought out his farm, the landlord was compensated, and the tenant paid off the purchase price over a certain number of years. That changed depending on the Act of Parliament, but essentially the tenant was advanced the money to help buy out his farm, and then he repaid that over a certain term of years. Now, the land purchase records, these are records really deriving from, in the main, the Irish Land Commission that was established in the early 1880s. The records concerning estates in Northern Ireland are freely accessible in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. So there are hundreds, thousands of these boxes in the Public Record Office. You just get an indication of the sort of thing you can find in these boxes. You'll see there are deeds, there are abstracts of title, there are inspectors' reports, there are maps, and so on. So this is all freely accessible in Prony for estates in Northern Ireland. The situation in the Republic of Ireland is not so good. The records are not available except in very limited circumstances. They're kept in off-site storage in Portlaoise. There are initiatives to try and make them more accessible, but that's not the case just at the moment. But certainly for Northern Ireland, these records are freely available in Prony. Now, the Abercorn estate was some 70,000 acres. There are maybe 24 boxes of these land commission files for that particular property. And going through them, eventually, I think I went through about 20 boxes, but eventually, before I found the actual record relating to my own ancestor. But here is the agreement for sale between vendor and tenant between the Duke of Abercorn and my great-grandfather, Charles Roulston. And within that, bound within that, there is the report of the inspector, which tells us a bit about the farm at the time. And it's clear that things were not necessarily going very well. Charles's father seems to have allowed things to slip a bit, but Charles came in and he was the one who bought out the farm. But I'm just blowing up this particular section here. So there's a note here. I was informed that the late tenant, Thomas Roulston, being in difficulties, was forced to sell the holding, and that his son, Charles Roulston, and then we'd hear this, who had been in America for some time, came home and bought it at public auction. So there you are. You could say Charles saved the day. The farm had actually been put up for sale by Thomas, but Charles came back from America and he was the one who actually bought it at public auction. So it's very interesting. There's a note that he was in America. The valuation revision books tells us he was in Australia. So he was certainly quite a well-traveled man in his day. And here we have the Land Commission land certificate issued to Charles Roulston just to confirm his purchase of the farm. Now, that is in my own personal possession. And just to emphasize the point that there are many documents like this that are not in archives but can still be found in personal collections or within, still owned by the family or held by the family. So the land purchase records, they do take time. For Northern Ireland, they are accessible, but they do take time to work through them. But they do contain untold riches as far as your farming ancestors are concerned. Okay, briefly then, some other sources. What else can you use to look for particular ancestors? And again, to emphasize, you will find many records that are held in personal possession, which can reveal much about your farming ancestor. This is an excerpt from the family Bible for the Roulstons that I have. There's a Margaret Ann Roulston who died in 1882. She had 9 children. She had 4 sons, a daughter, and then 4 more sons. You notice there's a Joseph Roulston, one of her sons, who died in Philadelphia on the 25th of May, 1896. So personal possessions like that can be tremendously useful. But what records can you find in the archives? Well, registers of freeholders. These were records of people who were entitled to vote. Now, really until the middle part of the 19th century, your right to vote, if you were a farmer, was tied to the nature of your relationship with the land. That is, it was linked to the tenure that you held your farm. So freeholders were those who had leases, were in possession of a lease for lives. That was the qualification to vote. First of all, you had to be a man. For much of the 18th century, you had to be a Protestant. You had the farm had to be worth a certain value, not that much, but just a certain value. But you had to have a lease for lives. If you had a lease for a large farm for a term of years, you couldn't vote. If you had a lease for a relatively modest farm or a life or 3 lives, you could vote. That was simply the nature of the franchise. Now, Prony has indexed many of the registers of freeholders in its collections from the early 18th century through to around about 1830. And you can get access to those through the Prony website. And just to show you the sort of thing you can find, this is from what's called a deputy court checkbook. Basically, it's a record of voters in County Antrim in 1776. And I've blown up a little snippet. So we have a farm here, or rather the freeholder here named as William Tate. The freehold is in Morusk. But blowing it up, you'll see that there's a note, comes to vote under his father John Tate's registry. Says his mother's name is Lennox, and that the lease was made to his father about 30 years ago, and that he is dead from 6 to 10 years, and that he had no brothers or sisters living. Now think of the genealogical value of that. Now, in this case, poor William Tate was still not allowed to vote, objected to for bribery. So things didn't work out so well for him in the end. But just look at the genealogical value that's recorded in that one little snippet. Now, newspapers, of course, I don't need to tell you how useful they can be. There are various ways to get access to newspapers now. The one I use the most is the British Newspaper Archive. There's also the Irish News Archive as well, but the British Newspaper Archive is based on newspapers held in the British Library, and it contains a huge number of locally printed newspapers in Ireland. Across the entire length of Ireland, you'll find newspapers in this particular database. It's a subscription website, but worth every penny to take out a subscription to it. You'll find information on this just to show you, in this case, premiums or sums of money awarded to farmers in the manner of Dunalong for improvements they had made to their farms. So there's an award for, say, new fences, furrow draining. And down here, my great-great-great-grandfather Robert Roulston won second prize in the competition for growing turnips in 1845. And he was awarded a £1 premium for that. But that's the sort of thing you can find in newspapers. Again, you're all familiar with the value of newspapers. I don't really need to say anything more about that. Agricultural census. From 1803, this is during the period of the Napoleonic Wars, and the government was concerned about a potential French invasion of Ireland. So for many coastal parishes or parishes reasonably near the coast, returns of livestock, that is farm animals, and dead stock, that is harvested crops, were recorded. The records for County Down are in the London Dairy Estate Collection in Prony. The records for North County Antrim are in the official papers in the National Archives of Ireland, but the Foundation has indexed many of these and they're available through its website. They're not all laid out so neatly as the one on the screen now, but in this case you can see where the name of the inhabitant, the livestock, and then the dead stock. Now what's very obvious looking at these is just how few livestock people possessed. I mean today, not very far away from where I am right now, there's a farmer who's milking hundreds of cows. But if you look at that, even a farmer who had 4 cows was in a big way of operating. Maybe just a few sheep and so on. So livestock, numbers of livestock were vastly less than they are now. And finally, of course, just to mention that wills and testamentary papers can be tremendously useful of looking for farming ancestors. And farmers, I dare say, were more likely than not to make a will, certainly from the latter part of the 19th century, as they were concerned about how their property would be disposed of. Typically, the farm went to the oldest son, but provision would have to be made for the widow of the farmer and for younger children. This is interesting because this is the will of a George Scott of Ballinacross in the parish of Mahara. And in this instance, he goes into detail about leaving the farm in Ballinacross, but he refers to the farm which I now occupy or am justly entitled to by power of attorney, transmitted to me by George Scott of the township of Truro in the province of Nova Scotia, bearing date the 2nd day of December 1774. And this will was drawn up in 1839. Interestingly, it wasn't proved until many years later, about over 20 years later. It was proved in 1860, but there it's referring back to a legal transaction concerning somebody in Nova Scotia in 1774. So it just shows you sometimes what you can find in wills. Now, wills, of course, you'll be aware that virtually all pre-1858 wills were destroyed in Dublin in 1922, as were original wills up to 1900 or just shortly afterwards. However, there are many abstracts and extracts of wills before 1858, and from 1858 onwards, you'll have the transcript books kept by the district registries in Ireland. In essence, in 1858, the state assumed responsibility for testamentary affairs. Before that, wills were probated in Church of Ireland courts. That doesn't mean to say, of course, that only members of the Church of Ireland made wills. It was simply that the Church of Ireland was responsible for testamentary affairs. But from 1858 onwards, the state took responsibility. This will may have been made in 1839. It was probated in 1860, so a copy survives in the local probate registry. Now in Prony, and now accessible through the Prony website, as are the wills, the equivalent wills for the district registries in the Republic of Ireland through the National Archives of Ireland website. So again, just shows you, to expect the unexpected, and never give up, never discount anything until you're absolutely 100% convinced that it's relevant or not relevant, but still always have that little doubt that maybe, just maybe, this is a relevant record, even if it does not appear to be so. But certainly never give up, keep persevering, and you never know what you might find. So for anyone who's interested, my own volume on researching farming ancestors is currently available on special offer through the Ulster Historical Foundation, and it goes into much more detail, of course, on researching farming ancestors in Ireland than I have presented to you this afternoon. But I'm very grateful to all of you for joining, and I'm now going to hand back to Fintan. You're muted still, Fintan.
William, thank you very much. That was superb, folks. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you found that very valuable. Just think of the range of material covered there by William in a masterly way, in just pretty much on the hour that he said he was going to take to do it. So really, William, I think we're all giving you a massive round of applause for that. Now, we are going to take a few questions, and as I said, they would be strictly about the subject being discussed. But before we do that, there is just a couple of things that I wanted to just share or go through with you, if I may. First of all, that in relation to wills that William was just talking about, the Ulster Historical Foundation has recently added, updated and repaired a number of our will databases, and we have actually released the first batch, which was about roughly about 113,000 index entries for wills, and we are working on another batch. Now, we've had these up on our website for quite a number of time, but as the website has migrated, the data gets out of sync, so we basically have refound them for you, if you will. So that's something to just bear in mind. And I just want to finish by saying what you've heard today, we hope you found valuable and useful for your research. And it's an example of what the Ulster Historical Foundation does. We are a registered charity in the United Kingdom, in Northern Ireland. We are an educational non-profit. We do not receive any public funding towards our work. We're a completely self-funded organisation. And you can imagine in these days that is not easy. So your best way to show your appreciation for the foundation is to either buy something from us or support us. So as William said, he's only touched on in his lecture just the range of material and the many references, the vital references to archival sources. And remember, his book is Ancestors in Ireland, not Ancestors in Ulster. So it covers the whole island. So one way to, I suppose, appreciate what William has just delivered and support us is to buy his book, as he said. And it's currently on offer, so you can actually buy it for just £8.99, about 12 US, about 16 Canadian, about 18 Australian, I think, roughly about that, about 20 New Zealand, and I think also about what, 12 or 13 euros. So that's sort of ballpark. William, if you could just move it forward, because I haven't got control of it. The other thing you may be interested in, as I mentioned at the start, William has published his research in Scots-Irish ancestor. The second edition came out in 2018. And for the past number of years, he's been working on this monumental work, his follow-up, his companion volume to that. So he's looking at the period now for the 9 counties of Ulster from 1800 to 1914. And we hope to have that out this coming autumn winter, and you would be able to subscribe to that book now. There are different levels of subscription reflecting the support you might give, and we invite you to subscribe to that book because you'll be the first amongst the subscribers, will be the first people to receive that book when it comes out. If you could just advance the next one, William.
Yep.
If you like what you've heard today in terms of the content delivered, just to let you know that the Ulster Historical Foundation and the team, that will be William, Gillian and myself, with Conleth ably assisting on practical matters, we deliver a online Irish Genealogical Essentials course over the winter months. So you have a very long period of time to watch the very many hours, something like nearly 30 hours of recordings on different subjects, and then we have quite a number of personal Zoom Q&As through the program to help you along. Anybody who's listening and who's done it, maybe you might give us a little testimonial to encourage others on, but that's something you could think about in the dark days of winter to possibly sign up for. And just finally, William, if you just move to the last slide. As I said, the foundation is self-supporting. We do not get public funding, and we do a lot to try and support the genealogical research community at home and abroad. So one of the best ways to help us is to support our work with a donation, large or small, it doesn't matter. And anybody who is a member of the foundation, member of our guild, will realise just how much new online content we have been adding in the past 18 months and how much we intend to keep adding. So even a small donation will really help the research community. You're helping us to help you. So perhaps you might think about a donation. But anyway, we'll stop the promo there. We will go to a few questions, William. Some people did answer them, or tried to, I don't mean try to, but did helpfully answer them. But we just picked these out as questions related to the topic. So the first one, William, Gillian, are you going to read the questions?
You might as well, Fintan.
Okay, first question. I am correct in understanding that not all landed estates had their records saved, and that all tenant farmers had, in inverted commas, if you will, to be part of a landed estate. Do you want to deal with that query?
Yes, sadly, many estate collections do not survive. What we have are principally well, in some cases, it ranges in terms of what's available. I mentioned already about the Abercorn estate. There are over 29,000 individually numbered items for that estate in Prony. But for many other estates, there may be only a handful of items. And sadly, for some estates, there are no records at all. Records were maybe burnt, either deliberately or accidentally, as scrap paper essentially is no longer of any interest. Other records, no doubt, remain to be discovered, maybe in suitcases in an attic or maybe in a solicitor's office or wherever. But yes, sadly, not every estate record survives that ever existed. We're very fortunate that we have what we do. But even say you take the Abercorn estate. The Abercorn estate records are very voluminous. The Abercorn papers include the best set of 18th century correspondence of any estate in Britain and Ireland of that era. But there are virtually no leases surviving for the Abercorn estate from the 18th century. There are certainly leases from the early 17th century. There are many leases from the 19th century. But just shows you, even within that huge estate collection, there's a big void in terms of the numbers of leases that actually survive.
Okay, William, the second one, and this was one question that other folk did share an answer for, but we would just put it to you as well. Can you give us a definition of a freeholder?
Okay, well, for the purposes of electoral politics, a freeholder was someone who was qualified to vote. And uh, as I mentioned, that really up until the middle part of the 19th century, to vote, you had to be to vote in say, a parliamentary election, a county constituency in a parliamentary election. You had to have uh, a lease for at least one life or lives. Okay, so that was the qualification. As I've said, you also had to be a man, adult male, over 21, 21 and upwards. For much of the 18th century, Catholics could not vote. The vote was restored to Catholics in 1793. And the property had to be worth at least 40 shillings once any of the dues and the rent and so on had been paid. So that was really essentially the qualification to vote. And the person who was qualified to vote in that way was termed a freeholder. Now, there were other connotations for what freeholder meant, but essentially for electoral purposes, it was somebody who was in possession of a lease for a life lease or a lease for lives.
Okay, thank you, William. Okay, going back to your talking about the townland valuation and the codes as shown for the quality of the house. Claire asked, were the codes the same for all townlands?
Yeah, I think that the codes were introduced by the valuation office in Dublin in an effort to try and have a systematic way of recording that information. Of course, in the very nature, the codes were open to interpretation. You know, one valuator may have considered a house in good repair, another may have considered it in middling repair. So, of course, there was a certain degree of subjectivity in terms of how the rules were interpreted. But those codes were drawn up by the valuation office and issued to all of the valuators.
Okay, thank you. Next one, Tony. Are there special records we might find that would show what happened during the potato famine, such as people had to break a lease and move? So just, William, want to just touch briefly on the famine and farming and farmers?
Yes, well, certainly you will find records in estate papers concerning the impact of the famine on farming families. So, for example, if you look at rentals of the period, you may find entries in those rentals to indicate that a family had left the townland, maybe emigrated. I've shown already an example for the Shirley estate from 1849 of families who were given assistance to leave during the famine period. There may be estate correspondence that concerns the impact of the famine on the farming families of the estate. So yes, there are certainly records within estate collections that will tell you about how the famine affected the families on that estate. It just, again, depends on what's available. For some estates, there'll be some very good records. The Shirley estate is an example. For other estates, there may be really nothing at all. But there is at least a potential that information exists.
Okay, this one's very quick. Are land purchase records for Northern Ireland available online or only in person at Prony?
It's essentially the actual those boxes I showed you. They're only available in person in Prony.
Okay, thank you, William. Okay, this one here sounds like it's genealogy, but it's not. It actually will benefit everyone. Ancestors left Tyrone for America in 1736. The townland is not known. Are there any surviving records from the 1730s? What would be my first step in researching in Ireland?
Well, I would have a look at a number of things to try and at least narrow down where the family was potentially living. So from 1796, you have a flax growers premium. So the government was encouraging the linen industry and it was encouraging people to grow flax. And if you planted a certain proportion of your farm with flax, you received maybe a spinning wheel or a loom for that. Now, I mentioned that in the context of Tyrone because the numbers of names for County Tyrone is very high. They're very high. You know, I'm talking about at least upwards of 5,000, maybe even upwards of 7,000 names for County Tyrone. Now, it's only the names are only arranged by parish, not by townland. But at least use that as a potential way to identify the parishes in which the name of your ancestors occurs. Now, I know that 1796 is 60 years on from 1736, but again, it's just a way of trying to identify where families were living in County Tyrone in the 18th century. Now, that is available as a database on the Ulster Historical Foundation website. You can search it. If you do, let's say you do find the parish, then it's a matter of identifying the records that are available for that parish. So let's say if it's Donaghadee Parish, the parish I come from, there are actually very good estate records for the actually there aren't for the Abercorn estate. I was going to say there are very good records. There are very good records from the 1740s onwards for the Abercorn estate, not for the period before that. But again, you may have names, families, of course. Some may have gone to America, some may have stayed on the farm. But you could check to see if any church records survive. Look at such things as vestry books. Now, these vestry books are records recording the business of the parish. They're with Church of Ireland records, but people of all denominational backgrounds can be found in vestry minute books. So just see if you can gather as much information about where a particular surname is found in County Tyrone initially, and then see where that takes you. Now, if it's a fairly common name, of course, you might have to go through parish after parish after parish, but just keep going and explore the full range of records, whether they're church records, whether they are land records, whether they are business records or miscellaneous or just gravestones or whatever. Just maximize the records that are available and see what you can find. But just a word of what 1736, it is a challenge. It's not straightforward to find a family as far back as 1736. It's not impossible, but it is going to be challenging.
Can I just jump in there as well and say that William's book that was mentioned earlier, the Researching Scots-Irish Ancestors, focuses on the 1600 to 1800 period. So if a couple of you have asked about ancestors who left in the 1700s, so I would highly recommend that book if that is a period that you are interested in. And just on top of that question, William, someone asked about how to access the Flax Growers list from 1796. And that is, Fintan's just put that in the chat. It is one of the databases on our website.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Gillian. I was going to jump in and mention Researching Scots-Irish as well. Folks, if you've not used that book before, it is an absolute essential guide to your research for the 9 counties, irrespective of whether your ancestor was Catholic, Episcopalian, Presbyterian, Methodist, or whatever. It doesn't matter. It covers all the bases. So we have a few more questions, William, to come. Jim says the valuation books end in the 1930s. These are the valuation revisions, of course. Is there a way to find out what happened to land after then, particularly if it was sold, and if so, where and who to?
Okay, well, certainly the first set of valuation revision books do finish around about 1930, but there are subsequent valuation books in Prony right up to the 1990s. So there's what's called, I think, the second general revaluation of 1930s, 40s, and then another valuation, and then another valuation after that. So those records are in Prony. And I'd particularly encourage you to check out the valuators' notebooks, ring binders. They date from 1956 through to 1975, and the valuators were going out and recording all sorts of things. So you might even get a ground plan of the house in which your ancestors lived in, and if they built an extension to it and changes to it and so on. So those records are in Prony. So post 1930, there's a vast collection of valuation books in the Public Record Office.
Okay, thank you. Amy, this is very pertinent and timely, William. What is the reference for the valuation field books at Prony? I will be there next week, so we need to get this information to Amy urgently.
Well, for the first valuation, the townland valuation, the field books are prefixed VAL/1/B. And then it's slash again, and it breaks down to the individual book. The first valuation field books, I should say, and the tenement valuation field books are arranged by parish within barony. If a parish was split between more than one barony, there'll be more than one book. But essentially, the first valuation field books in Prony VAL/1/B. The accompanying maps are VAL/1/D. And then the tenement valuation field books in Prony are VAL/2 slash B and slash D for the map. So B for the field books, D for the maps.
Fintan,
Okay.
there's just one more question as well. It's just in the
Well,
chat.
we've two more, Gillian. So
Oh,
if you
okay,
wouldn't
go
mind,
ahead. Sorry, I didn't
I
know
was
if you
just
were
typing
talking about
something
me.
in there for just to help folk with what William just said. So you take the question you were going to mention first, okay?
William, so the question is, would papers for groups such as the Drapers, Salters, and Vintners companies also be included in what is termed landed estate papers?
Yes, very much so. Yeah. I mean, they were institutional organizations, but yes, they would certainly be the records for those the Drapers and so on. That would certainly be counted as landed estates. The typical practice of the London companies, like the Drapers and Vintners and Salters and so on, certainly for much of the 17th, 18th, and into the early 19th century, was to lease the entirety of their estate to a particular individual or maybe a consortium. And so those individuals who were essentially middlemen would be responsible for managing their estates, and they would simply pay a sum of money to say, the Drapers or whoever for the right to do so. In the 19th century, many of the companies took back direct possession of those estates and managed them directly. So bear that in mind. But say the records, Prony has got some very good records for the Drapers Company estate and the Salters Company estate, and has records for many of the other properties as well. There's just
Okay,
to
well,
mention like institutions. I mean, like, you had individual families who owned land. Don't forget the Church of Ireland was a major landowner in Ireland simply because of the impact of the Reformation and its landed endowment. The Church of Ireland was a major landowner in Ireland, arguably the single largest landowner in Ireland. You had also institutions like the London companies that have been mentioned. Also like the likes of Trinity College Dublin. Trinity College Dublin owned tens of thousands of acres of land in Ireland. And so its records relating to the management of those lands are in the Archives Department of Trinity College Dublin, or the Manuscripts Department.
okay. William, there's just one last question, but you have answered it already in the response to Diane and her ancestors in 1756, but it's just an opportunity to maybe just give a last few remarks or even just touch on. So it's from Catherine. Our ancestors left in the 1700s. What are the best sources I should focus on? I believe Griffith Valuation was much later. So what William has said already to Diane, and we mentioned the Research in Scots Irish Ancestors book, Catherine's exactly what you should do. But William, if you want to just
Okay,
finish
sure.
on that particular point,
Okay,
or
well,
anything else you want to say in concluding. Sorry, I didn't mean it.
yeah, sure. There are still, although yes, Griffith's Valuation, you mentioned it, like the valuation records are 19th century onwards, okay? Two main sets of records to consider for the 18th century. One will be the records of the churches, if they survive. Many don't, but many do. And then the records of the landed estate. So records relating to the occupation of land. And Gillian has mentioned already that if you use my book, Research in Scots Irish Ancestors, I go through every parish in the province of Ulster, over 300 parishes, and I summarize the records that are available for those parishes. So I identify the churches and which records survive, and I identify the landed estate properties, and there's a separate appendix listing in detail what survives for each of those landed estates. There are various sources that could be considered census substitutes. So the 1740 census of Protestant householders is very good for the Inishowen Peninsula and Donegal, for County Londonderry, and for North County Antrim. There's the 1766 religious census, which covers, it's a bit more hit and miss in terms of what survives, but many instances you can get names of householders. There's the, I mentioned already, the 1796 flax growers list. So these are not like proper census records like the 1901 census, but at least they will give you names of farmers or occupiers, at the very least on a parish basis. And that allows you at least to identify parishes where your ancestors lived. And then you can pursue things further by saying, well, what church records survive? What landed estate papers survive? In terms of church records, many people looking for an ancestor who left in the 18th century, their ancestor was probably a Presbyterian. That's just the nature of immigration from Ulster at that time. It was dominated by Presbyterians. Although maybe you don't get many records of Presbyterian, or rather registers of baptisms and marriages with Presbyterians, congregations for that time, there are different tiers of Presbyterian government. The session, the local kirk session, the presbytery, the synod. So there are many other items you can look at. So don't just say, like, well, there are no baptisms of that church. That's it. Find out what presbytery it's in. See if there are presbytery records. Even consider the Synod of Ulster records. So again, as I said, just maximize the records that are available. Just do a complete saturation search of what's out there. And again, you just never know what you might find. You can often find what you didn't expect to find. And that's what makes genealogy such fun.
Great. William, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We will save the chat and we will share the chat. So all the links that were put into the chat and the queries and the comments and the additional advice everybody gave. Remember, genealogy is a collective pursuit, not an individual one. So thank you all for your contributions today. Thank you all for listening in such numbers to the live program. And we will, of course, take down the recording, edit it, and make that available soon. We will let you know that available soon too. We will also importantly send you those links to our courses and books and donations. You please do think about supporting us. And thank you again for taking part. And before we close out, you can throw as many hand claps in William's direction as you would like to. We think it was a fabulous presentation, and thank you very much, William. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.